What was the toughest part of being the eldest sibling? It's been a long journey to get here. For most of my life, the hardest part of being the oldest sibling wasn't sibling squabbles. It was being forced to raise all six of my younger brothers and sisters by myself. My parents' philosophy? That's what oldest daughters were for. I was only 8 when Mom had her second baby, and she literally handed him to me, saying, "Here's your responsibility." By the time I was 13, there were 6 more kids after me, each one becoming mine. The moment they came home from the hospital, Mom and Dad moved all the babies into my room. They'd tell everyone they simply had one very mature daughter. And I believed them. I mean, what else was I supposed to believe? Mom always said that in good families, oldest daughters raised the younger kids so parents could focus on important things. This was my job, my purpose, what I was born to do. But it came with a chilling warning. My mom would hold baby Oliver close, then look me dead in the eye and say, "If you ever complain or tell anyone you need help, social services will take all these kids away. They'll split you up, put you in different homes. You'll never see each other again. Is that what you want?" I was 9 years old, and the thought of losing them made me sob. She just smiled. "That's what I thought. You're their only chance at staying together." So I handled everything. Everything. While my parents lived like a carefree couple, I was doing midnight feedings, potty training, homework help, doctor visits. They'd literally walk past crying babies like they were invisible. At restaurants, they'd get a table for 2 while I managed 6 kids at a separate table. When strangers asked if I was the babysitter, I'd force a smile and nod because the truth felt like it might mean losing everything. My parents had given me 6 hostages disguised as siblings, but each one of them had carved out a piece of my heart. Leo, the baby, only slept if I rubbed his back just right. The twins, Luna and Ruby, had their own secret language, but they always translated for me. Oliver, at 10, still crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. Ethan drew me pictures every day that said, "I love you, Mama," in crayon. And little Ivy? She called me her best friend. I was drowning, desperate, but I could never ask for help because I was so terrified they'd be taken from me. I was the only parent they knew, and they were safe with me. I couldn't risk ruining that. The school counselor noticed my exhaustion once and offered resources. I almost broke down and told her everything. But then I imagined Luna crying in some foster home, wondering why I let them take her away. So I just smiled and said I needed more sleep. By 13, I was a ghost of myself. I'd wake at 5 a.m. to pack lunches, braid hair, find matching socks for 6 kids. I missed so much school that truancy letters came home, but I forged Mom's signature and prayed no one would call. Sometimes I'd fall asleep sitting up, still holding Leo. The truancy officer eventually came to investigate. My parents acted shocked. "We had no idea," Mom said sweetly, shooting me a look that screamed, "One word, and they're gone forever." So, I took the blame. Said I'd been skipping. Accepted the consequences. Then, my parents planned a week-long cruise, leaving me with 6 kids and $50. 3 days in, Luna fell off the playground and split her chin open. At the hospital, I held her while she sobbed into my neck, her blood soaking my shirt, her tiny hands gripping me like I was the only safe thing in the world. They wouldn't treat her without a parent. I sat there for 3 agonizing hours, my baby sister bleeding and crying, while I tried to forge signatures that might save her. I finally broke. I called my grandmother. When she arrived and saw me, covered in Luna's blood, trying to comfort 5 other terrified siblings while nurses debated calling social services, her face just changed. She got Luna treated, then loaded all of us into her van. "Please don't let them take us away from each other," I begged her, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. "I know I'm not doing good enough, but they're all I have, and I'm all they have, and if you tell anyone, they'll split us up." Grandma pulled over and held me while I just fell apart. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice laced with pain. "What have they done to you?" For the first time in 5 years, an adult saw what was happening. And I was terrified of what would come next. My parents came home to an empty house and called the police. At Grandma's, they spun their story perfectly. "Our daughter won't let us parent. Mom cried, selling the act. She threatens the little ones, tells them we'll abandon them if they come to us for anything. They claimed I'd created this sick situation where my siblings were trauma-bonded to me. The social worker separated us for questioning. I could hear Leo screaming for me through the walls, and every cry felt like my heart being ripped out. This was it, the moment Mom had warned me about. They were going to take my babies away. She's poisoned them against us, Dad chimed in. We're concerned she might hurt them or herself if we forcibly separate them. That's why we've been careful, trying to gradually reestablish normal boundaries. I could see my grandmother start to wonder if they were telling the truth. The social worker looked troubled. She asked my siblings who took care of them, and even Oliver, just 10, said, "Mama," and pointed at me. I saw her writing severe attachment disorder in her notes. She started making calls about emergency placement. We'd be split up by morning, sent to different homes across the state. I was going to lose the only people that mattered to me, the only reason I had for living. All because I'd never been allowed to just be their sister like I should have been. Mom caught my eye and mouthed, "I warned you." The social worker's pen scratched across her clipboard while my world crumbled. Leo's screams grew more desperate. My arms ached to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay, even though I knew it wouldn't be. Grandma's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. The doubt I'd seen in her eyes seemed to waver as she watched my parents' performance. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though no actual tears fell. Dad rubbed her shoulder, his practiced sympathy only broken by the warning glances he shot me. Ms. Chun, the social worker, cleared her throat. She looked tired, like she'd seen too many broken families. Oliver's voice drifted through the wall, high and scared. He was asking for me, not Mom or Dad, because I was the one who checked for monsters under his bed and knew exactly how he liked his sandwiches cut. Mom leaned forward, oozing maternal concern. She explained their worries about my mental state, how I'd supposedly threatened to harm myself if separated from the children. Lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound believable. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Dad cut me off, weaving a story about finding me asleep standing up, holding Leo at 3 a.m. He made it sound like negligence, not exhaustion. Made it seem like I was the danger, not the solution to their abandonment. Grandma's grip on my hand tightened. She'd been quiet, processing everything. The dried, rust-colored stains of Luna's blood on my shirt were a stark reminder of how alone I'd been. Ms. Chin asked about the hospital incident. Mom's face crumbled into practiced devastation, explaining how I'd taken Luna without permission, forged signatures, refused to call them. She conveniently left out the part where they'd been unreachable on a cruise ship. The lies stacked up. I was unstable, controlling, creating unhealthy attachments. I was the problem that needed solving. But through it all, my siblings' voices filtered through the walls. Ruby asking when she could see me. Ethan crying because he wanted to show me his new drawing. Ivy's little voice insisting I was her best friend, not her sister. Ms. Chen wrote everything down, her pen moving across the page, deciding our futures. 7 lives hanging on her interpretation of a situation too twisted for any manual to cover. Then the front door opened, and Miss Chen's colleague entered with my siblings trailing behind. Leo lunged for me the second he saw me, his little body shaking with relief. I caught him and held tight, terrified this might be the last time. One by one, they gravitated to me. Ivy climbed into my lap. The twins pressed against my sides. Oliver stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders. Even Ethan, trying to be brave, leaned against my knee. Mom made a soft sound of distress. Dad shook his head sadly, as if this proved their point about unhealthy attachment. But Grandma was watching something else entirely. She saw how I automatically checked Luna's bandage, how I shifted to accommodate all of them without thinking, how my body curved protectively around them like I'd done it 1,000 times before. Because I had. Miss Chun observed our cluster, making more notes while Mom explained how the children refused to accept appropriate boundaries, how they'd been conditioned to rely solely on me. It was like she was crying about her daughter not letting her parent, while the social worker literally watched all 6 kids cling to their sister, like she was their whole world. Leo buried his face in my neck. I rubbed his back in the specific pattern that helped him calm down. Muscle memory took over. Grandma suddenly spoke up, her voice cutting through Mom's monologue with quiet authority. She asked Ms. Chun if she could share some observations from the past few days. Mom's face tightened. This wasn't part of their script. They'd expected Grandma to be confused, easily manipulated. They hadn't counted on her really seeing us. Grandma described finding me at the hospital, covered in Luna's blood, yet keeping 5 other children calm. She talked about watching me manage breakfast that morning, how each child got exactly what they needed without me even asking. She mentioned the homework folders I'd organized, the permission slips I'd signed, the lunches I'd packed with notes in each one. Dad tried to interrupt, but Grandma kept going. She described the bedtime routine she'd witnessed, how I'd read 3 different stories, checked on everyone twice, responded to every call for water or monsters or just reassurance. Mom's mask slipped for a second. Raw annoyance flashed across her face, but Grandma saw it, and more importantly, Miss Chun saw it. The social worker asked to speak with Grandma privately. When they returned, something had shifted. Ms. Chun looked at our huddle with different eyes. She saw past the attachment disorder to something else, something that made her pen pause. She announced she needed to do a home visit. Mom's smile went rigid. Dad's hand clenched. They tried to refuse, citing privacy, but Ms. Chun insisted. It was protocol. Grandma offered to drive us all. Mom and Dad had no choice but to agree or look like they had something to hide. We loaded into vehicles, my siblings still clinging to me like lifelines. The drive to our house felt like heading to an execution. Every mile brought us closer to evidence I'd hidden for years. The single bed where all 7 of us slept, the lock on the outside of my door, the calendar where I tracked everything because I was too exhausted to remember. Mom chatted pleasantly with Miss Chin during the drive, spinning stories about family game nights that never happened and vacations we'd never taken. Dad added supporting details with practiced ease. But Luna chose that moment to speak up. Her small voice carried clearly. She asked if we were going back to the room. Not home, not our house, just the room. Miss Chen's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She asked Luna what room she meant. And my brave, injured little sister explained, matter-of-factly, that we all stayed in one room always because that's where I was, and I kept them safe. Mom laughed, high and false. She explained that the children liked having sleepovers in their big sister's room. Wasn't that sweet? Don't all siblings do that? But Ruby, not to be outdone by her twin, added that we didn't have sleepovers. We lived there. All our clothes were there, our toys. Everything. Because Mama needed us close to take care of us. The car fell silent. Mom's knuckles went white, gripping her purse. Dad stared straight ahead. We pulled into our driveway. The house looked normal from the outside. 2 stories, nice yard, suburban dream. No one would guess what happened inside. Ms. Chin asked to see the children's rooms, plural. Mom led the way, heels clicking, explaining about recent renovations that hadn't happened. She opened doors to pristine guest rooms with dusty surfaces and empty closets, spaces decorated for children who'd never slept there. Then we reached my room, our room. Mom's hand hesitated on the doorknob. Dad suggested we skip it. Teenage girls, you know how they are. But Ms. Chun insisted. And when the door opened, the truth was laid bare. One twin bed pushed against the wall, a crib crammed in the corner, sleeping bags rolled up in the closet. A single dresser overflowing with clothes for 7 children. And that lock. The lock on the outside of the door that had kept us in during their dinner parties. Miss Chen stepped inside slowly, taking in every detail. The homework station I'd created from a card table. The color-coded bins for each child's school supplies. The schedule taped to the wall tracking feedings, diaper changes, permission slip deadlines. Mom started explaining rapidly, something about me insisting on this arrangement, about teenage rebellion and control issues, but her voice had gone shrill. Desperate. Ms. Chen examined the lock. She tested it, noting how it only worked from the outside. She asked why a teenager's door would need to lock from the outside. Dad mumbled about safety, keeping the younger children from wandering. But Oliver, brave Oliver, who still called me Mama when he was scared, spoke up. He explained how the lock kept us in when they had company. How I taught them to be quiet, made it a game, pretending we were hiding from dragons so the little ones wouldn't cry and make them angry. The truth spilled out in pieces. Ethan showing his drawings, all addressed to Mama, all featuring 7 little figures and no adults. Ivy explaining how I fixed her always because the other grown-ups were too busy. Luna describing how I sang them to sleep every night while the house party music thumped through the walls. Ms. Chun took pictures. She made notes. She asked careful questions that my siblings answered with innocent honesty. Each word another crack in my parents' facade. Mom tried one last manipulation. She pulled Miss Chun aside and whispered about her concerns for my mental health, how I'd been showing signs of delusion, believing I was their mother, how they'd been trying to get me help. But Grandma had heard enough. She'd been silent through the house tour, watching everything with growing horror. Now she spoke, her voice shaking with controlled fury. She asked my parents when they'd last fed their children, helped with homework, kissed a scraped knee, read a bedtime story. She asked them to name their children's teachers, their favorite foods, their fears. Silence. Dad tried to deflect, but Grandma wasn't done. She asked why a 13-year-old had permission slip forms in her backpack, why I knew the pediatrician's number by heart, why the only recent family photos were selfies I'd taken with my siblings. Mom's mask finally shattered. She snapped that they'd given me everything. A roof over my head, food to eat, siblings to love. What more did I want? Love, I thought but didn't say. Parents, a childhood, the chance to be a sister instead of a mother. But those words stayed locked in my throat. Ms. Chun had seen enough. She announced that she needed to make some calls, consult with her supervisor. In the meantime, she strongly recommended the children return to Grandma's house for the night. Mom protested, but it wasn't a request. Ms. Chen's tone made that clear. She would be in touch tomorrow with next steps. There would be a formal investigation, court involvement if necessary. The word court made my stomach drop, but Grandma's hand found mine again. Steady and sure. She'd seen the truth now. She understood what they'd done to me, to us. We gathered what we could carry. Favorite stuffed animals, Leo's special blanket, the twins' shared pillow. Mom and Dad watched from the doorway, their perfect parent performance finally over. As we loaded back into Grandma's van, Mom caught my arm. Her nails dug in just enough to hurt. She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear. She reminded me what happened to children in foster care. How they got split up, sent to different states. How some never saw each other again. How this was all my fault for not being grateful. But Grandma saw. She stepped between us, breaking Mom's grip. She told my mother that the only fault here was theirs. That what they'd done had a name, and that name was abuse. We drove away in silence. My siblings dozed around me, exhausted. I stared out the window, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Grandma's house appeared like a sanctuary. We stumbled inside, exhausted children clinging to whatever part of me they could reach. I settled them in the guest room, maintaining our usual sleeping arrangement because anything else would have terrified them. Leo whimpered when I tried to put him down, his fingers tangled in my shirt. The house phone rang just as I'd gotten everyone settled. Grandma answered, Mom's shrill tone carrying through the thin walls. Grandma hung up mid-sentence. Her face grim, she explained my parents were already working on their next move. They'd called their lawyer friend. The manipulation machine was spinning. I tucked blankets around my siblings, my hands moving automatically through routines I'd perfected. Grandma watched, her expression shifting between anger and sorrow. She whispered that she should have known, should have visited more often. I shook my head. My parents had been too good at their performance. Morning arrived too quickly. Miss Chin called early, scheduling another meeting. She needed to interview each child separately. My stomach churned. I couldn't protect them from questions I couldn't hear. Leo went first, carried by Ms. Chen's colleague because he refused to walk away from me. His screams echoed through the house for 20 minutes before they gave up. He burrowed into my arms, trembling. The twins went together, insisting they couldn't be separated. Through the closed door, I heard Ruby's clear voice explaining their daily routine. How I braided their hair each morning. How I knew which twin liked peanut butter. Oliver surprised me. He walked into the room with his shoulders squared, my brave boy. He emerged 30 minutes later, red eyes but determination on his face. He whispered that he told them everything about the lock on the door. Ethan brought his drawings. When he came out, Miss Chen's colleague followed, holding one picture. Mama, surrounded by smaller figures, while two adult shapes stood outside a thick black border. Ivy went last, clutching a doll. Her voice carried clearly, explaining how I fixed her always and read her stories because the other grown-ups were always too busy. While they interviewed my siblings, Miss Chen questioned me in the kitchen. I answered honestly, too exhausted to maintain any pretense. I explained about forging permission slips, missing school for pediatrician appointments, stretching $50 to feed 7 kids for a week. She asked why I'd never told anyone. The question hung heavy. How could I explain years of psychological conditioning, the constant threat of separation, the way Mom had made me believe I was the only thing standing between my siblings and disaster? I told her about the warnings, the stories about foster care that gave me nightmares, the time Mom had driven us past a group home, and described in detail how my siblings would suffer because of my selfishness. Miss Chen's expression shifted. She asked if I'd ever been allowed to have friends over, attend school events, if I'd had any life outside caring for my siblings. The answer to everything was no. The interviews concluded as evening approached. Ms. Chen explained their preliminary findings. The children showed clear signs of parentification and role confusion. My siblings genuinely believed I was their primary caregiver. They showed minimal attachment to our parents and significant anxiety when separated from me. She scheduled a formal assessment for the next day with a child psychologist. In the meantime, she strongly recommended the children remain in Grandma's care. She gave my parents this news over the phone, and I could hear Mom's explosion from across the room. That night, I barely slept. My siblings piled around me, seeking comfort. My mind raced. What if the psychologist agreed with my parents? What if they decided I was the problem? The morning brought new challenges. My parents arrived with their lawyer, a man who smiled too much. He presented documents about grandparent rights and custody arrangements, legal terms designed to confuse and intimidate. But Grandma had made calls, too. Her friend's daughter, a family law attorney, arrived just as the meeting began, matching the other lawyer's smile with steel in her eyes. The psychologist, Dr. Martinez, arrived. She observed our morning routine, taking notes. My parents performed beautifully. They greeted each child warmly, though Leo screamed when Dad reached for him. Mom explained it away as a phase. Dr. Martinez observed how my siblings naturally oriented toward me, how they looked to me for comfort. She watched my parents. Mom's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at the younger children. Dad checked his phone constantly. Neither knew which twin was which, without checking a birthmark. Their lawyer tried to control the narrative, painting my parents as victims of a disturbed teenager. He had printouts from online forums about sibling abuse. But then Oliver did something unexpected. He walked to the table and placed his journal in front of Dr. Martinez. He'd written a new entry that morning. My sister takes care of us because nobody else does. She isn't mean. She loves us. Please don't take her away. Mom's mask slipped. She snapped at Oliver for lying, for being manipulated. Her voice rose, sharp enough to make Ivy cry. Dad tried to calm her, but the damage was done. Dr. Martinez had seen the real woman. The evaluation continued for hours. Dr. Martinez interviewed Grandma. Mrs. Patterson from down the street arrived unexpectedly, testifying about seeing me manage 6 children alone. My old teacher, Miss Roberts, came too, with records of every forged signature, every missed parent conference where I'd shown up instead. The evidence mounted like building blocks. Each person added another piece to the picture of neglect and abandonment my parents had carefully hidden. Mom grew increasingly agitated, her perfect mother facade cracking. She finally exploded when the school counselor arrived with documentation of my declining grades and exhaustion. Mom accused everyone of conspiring against her. Dad tried damage control, but it was too late. Dr. Martinez had seen enough. She announced she needed to make her report to Ms. Chin immediately. Her initial assessment was clear. The children had been subjected to severe parentification and emotional neglect. My parents' lawyer advised them to leave. Mom refused, making wild accusations, but when Leo started crying and reaching for me, when the twins hid behind my legs, when even brave Oliver backed away from her approach, she finally stopped. The silence was deafening. They left with threats of court battles. That evening, Ms. Chin returned with official documents. Emergency custody was being transferred to Grandma temporarily. A full investigation would follow, but for now, we could stay together. The relief nearly knocked me off my feet. Grandma signed papers while I held my siblings close. They didn't understand the legal complexities, but they knew something important had happened. Ivy asked if we could stay forever. I couldn't answer through the tears. Ms. Chen explained the next steps: court hearings, custody evaluations, mandatory family counseling. My parents would have supervised visitation rights initially. The process would be long and difficult, but the immediate danger had passed. She pulled me aside privately. She acknowledged what I'd done, the impossible situation I'd been forced into. She promised that keeping us together was the priority, that no one would punish me for protecting my siblings the only way I knew how. That night, Grandma tucked us all into beds she'd hastily assembled. Real beds, with clean sheets, enough space for everyone. Leo still insisted on sleeping next to me, but for the first time, it felt like a choice rather than necessity. I lay awake, listening to their peaceful breathing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. My parents wouldn't give up easily. There would be court dates and evaluations. But tonight, we were safe. We were together. And for the first time in 5 years, I had an adult who truly wanted to help. Grandma appeared in the doorway, checking on us one more time. She whispered that she'd hired a better lawyer, someone who specialized in cases like ours, someone who understood that family wasn't just about blood, but about who showed up when it mattered. The coming weeks tested us all. My parents tried every manipulation, every legal maneuver, every emotional weapon. But something had fundamentally shifted. The truth was out. The performance was over. And I was no longer alone in protecting the only family that mattered to me. The next morning brought chaos to Grandma's doorstep. My parents arrived with 2 lawyers this time, their expressions cold and calculated. They'd filed emergency motions overnight, claiming I'd kidnapped my siblings, that Grandma was enabling a dangerous situation. They demanded immediate return of the children. Grandma's lawyer reviewed the documents while I kept my siblings in the back room. Through the window, I watched Mom dab at dry eyes for the lawyer's benefit. Dad checked his watch repeatedly, annoyed at the inconvenience. Ms. Chen arrived within the hour, accompanied by her supervisor. They needed to assess the situation immediately. The supervisor, Mrs. Thornton, insisted on interviewing me alone. Grandma's lawyer advised me to answer honestly, but carefully. I sat across from her, my hands trembling. She asked pointed questions. Had I taken the children without permission? Technically, yes, though my parents had left us alone. Had I refused to return them? Yes, because they'd abandoned us for a cruise. Each truthful answer sounded damning without context. Meanwhile, my parents' lawyers interviewed Grandma in the living room. I could hear Mom's voice rising occasionally, playing the victim perfectly. She'd learned new phrases overnight about parental alienation. Oliver crept into the kitchen, defying instructions. He pressed against my side, and Mrs. Thornton watched our interaction. When she asked him who took care of him, he pointed at me without hesitation. She wrote something in her notes that made my chest tighten. The twins escaped next. They climbed into my lap, explaining to Mrs. Thornton that I braided their hair every morning. Luna added that I cut the crust off their sandwiches just right. Mrs. Thornton observed how naturally they oriented to me, how I responded to their needs without thinking. She asked if they ever went to their parents for comfort. The twins looked confused. Ruby finally said they tried once, but Mom said she was busy. By afternoon, all my siblings had found their way to the kitchen. Even Leo, who should have been napping, toddled in. He climbed into my arms and fell asleep against my chest, his thumb in his mouth. Mrs. Thornton watched me juggle 6 children effortlessly. I helped Ethan with a splinter while holding Leo, mediated a dispute between the twins, reminded Oliver about his inhaler, and fixed Ivy's twisted sock, all while answering questions. She asked about medical care. I rattled off vaccination schedules, allergies, medications, and the pediatrician's direct number from memory. When she asked my parents the same questions later, they couldn't name a single allergy or medication. The lawyers argued for hours. My parents' team insisted on immediate return, claiming psychological damage. Grandma's lawyer countered with documentation of neglect and abandonment. Dr. Martinez arrived for an emergency session, providing an immediate assessment. My parents performed their routine again, but cracks showed. Mom snapped at Ivy for interrupting. Dad ignored Leo's outstretched arms, too focused on his phone. During a break, I overheard Mom whispering furiously to her lawyer. She wanted to know why this was taking so long, why they couldn't just take their property and leave. The lawyer reminded her to call them children, not property. Her mask had slipped enough that even he noticed. Mrs. Thornton pulled me aside privately. She acknowledged the unusual situation, but said the kidnapping allegations were serious. If my parents could prove them, I could face charges. The room spun at the thought of jail, of leaving my siblings completely unprotected. But then she added something else. She'd seen enough cases to recognize the truth. She advised me to stay calm, keep caring for my siblings normally, and trust the process. Her eyes held an understanding that made me want to cry. Evening approached with no resolution. The lawyers agreed to reconvene tomorrow with a family court judge present. My parents left with threats about criminal charges and lawsuits. Mom's parting look promised retribution. That night, I barely slept again. Every sound made me think police were coming to arrest me. Leo woke repeatedly, sensing my distress. I held him close, memorizing his weight in my arms in case it was the last time. Morning brought a circus to Grandma's lawn. My parents had called extended family, painting themselves as victims. Aunts and uncles I'd never met stood outside, demanding to see the children they'd never bothered to visit. Grandma refused to let them in. They shouted accusations about brainwashing and elder abuse. Someone even called the police, claiming a hostage situation. 2 officers arrived, looking weary at the family drama. They interviewed everyone separately. By now, my siblings' story never wavered. I took care of them. I'd always taken care of them. The officers noted the lock on my bedroom door and the photos Ms. Chun had taken. The single bed for 7 children. The evidence of systematic neglect. The family court judge arrived at noon. Judge Reeves was an older woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She commandeered Grandma's dining room as a makeshift courtroom, though she emphasized this was just a preliminary hearing. My parents presented their case first. Their lawyers painted a picture of concerned parents, trying to retrieve children from a disturbed teenager's control. They had character witnesses, friends who'd never questioned why they never saw the children. But then the evidence mounted against them. Ms. Chun presented her findings. Dr. Martinez explained parentification and role reversal. Mrs. Thornton, despite her initial skepticism, testified about observing me manage 6 children with more skill than most adults. The judge asked to speak with each child. My parents' lawyer objected, but she overruled him. One by one, my siblings told their truth. Oliver explained about the lock. The twins described sleeping on the floor. Ethan showed his drawings. Ivy talked about being hungry when I wasn't there to make food. Leo was last. At 2, he could barely testify, but his actions spoke volumes. When the judge asked him to go to his mommy, he toddled straight to me. When she clarified she meant his other mommy, he looked confused and pressed closer to me. My parents' lawyer tried damage control, arguing about biological rights and temporary confusion, but the judge had seen enough. She issued a preliminary ruling. The children would remain with Grandma under emergency custody. My parents would have supervised visitation only, contingent on completing therapy and parenting classes. Any criminal charges were dismissed as unfounded given the evidence of abandonment. Mom exploded. She screamed about her rights, about the injustice, about how we'd all regret this. Dad tried to calm her, but she turned on him, too. blaming him for not controlling the situation better. Their perfect unity cracked in front of everyone. The extended family melted away, embarrassed. The friends who'd come as character witnesses left quietly. In the end, my parents stood alone on Grandma's lawn. Their performance finally over, with no audience left to appreciate it. But they weren't done. Over the following weeks, they tried every angle. They reported Grandma for elder abuse. They called CPS with anonymous tips about substance use. They filed complaints about truancy. Each investigation found the same thing: 7 children thriving in Grandma's care. Perfect attendance now that I didn't have to miss school. Grades improving. Leo speaking more words every day. The twins growing confident enough to play separately. The supervised visits were disasters. Mom spent the entire time trying to interrogate the children about what they told the judge. Dad sat in the corner on his phone, occasionally complaining about missing work. The supervisor ended several visits early due to inappropriate behavior. They tried manipulation through gifts. Expensive toys appeared, bribes for affection, but Oliver pushed away a remote control car, saying he'd rather have someone read to him. The twins ignored the fancy dolls, asking instead why Mom never braided their hair. Their lawyer advised them to show genuine change. They enrolled in parenting classes, but attended sporadically. They started therapy but fired 3 therapists who suggested they might be at fault. They couldn't fake accountability because they genuinely believed they'd done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, life at Grandma's house settled into new rhythms. I still woke early, but now Grandma helped with breakfast. My siblings still came to me for comfort, but they began to trust Grandma, too. Leo even napped in her arms sometimes. School became possible again. I joined study groups, made a friend, even attended a school dance. My siblings thrived with consistent care and actual parenting. Oliver's anxiety decreased. The twins developed individual personalities. Ethan's drawings showed happy figures now. The final custody hearing arrived 6 months later. My parents entered with new lawyers, their 4th set. They'd crafted a new narrative about temporary mental health struggles, about being overwhelmed, about wanting to repair their family. But the evidence was overwhelming. 6 months of failed supervised visits, multiple professionals testifying about the damage done, my siblings' clear preference documented extensively. Even their new lawyers seemed to know they were fighting a losing battle. I testified last. The judge asked me directly what I wanted. For the first time in 6 years, I spoke my truth in front of my parents without fear. I explained the exhaustion, the isolation, the constant terror of separation. I described raising 6 children while being a child myself. Mom tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced her. I continued, explaining how I loved my siblings, but I wanted to be their sister, not their mother. How they deserved real parents, not owners who saw them as burdens. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Full custody to Grandma. My parents' rights reduced to supervised visits every other week, contingent on completing therapy and parenting classes. The parentification was noted as severe emotional abuse in official records. My parents left without a word to any of us. Their performance had no finale, no dramatic exit. They simply walked out, already discussing an appeal with their lawyers, but everyone knew it was over. They'd lost their audience permanently. That night, we celebrated quietly. Grandma made a special dinner. My siblings drew pictures and sang songs. Leo took his first independent steps across the living room, finally confident enough to let go. We cheered like he'd won an Olympic medal. Months passed. My parents' visits became less frequent. They'd cancel for work trips or social events. Eventually, they moved 2 states away for a fresh start. Their visits dropped to monthly, then holidays only, then hardly at all. I started therapy to process 6 years of trauma. My siblings attended play therapy to learn healthy attachments. Grandma took parenting classes voluntarily, determined to give us everything we'd missed. We weren't perfect, but we were healing. On my 15th birthday, Grandma threw me a real party. Friends from school came. We played silly games and ate too much cake. My siblings made me cards with drawings and misspelled words that meant everything. For the first time, I felt like a teenager. The adoption finalization came through on a rainy Tuesday. Grandma officially became our legal guardian permanently. My parents hadn't contested it, too busy with their new lives to fight anymore. We stood in the judge's chambers, all 7 of us plus Grandma, becoming a legal family. That evening, I tucked my siblings into their own beds, in their own rooms. They still sometimes climbed in with me during storms, but by choice now, not necessity. I kissed each forehead, said goodnight, and walked to my own room. My room with posters on the walls and homework on my desk, with a door that locked from the inside if I wanted privacy. With space for just me, because I was 15, and that's what 15-year-olds deserved. Grandma appeared in my doorway for our new nightly ritual. She asked if everyone was settled, if I needed anything, if I was okay. Such simple questions, but they meant everything. Someone else was checking, caring, parenting. I pulled out my journal, a gift from my therapist. Inside, I wrote about normal teenage things, school drama, crush updates, weekend plans. The entries were boring and beautiful, exactly what they should be. My siblings were safe, loved, and thriving. And finally, so was I. It's still wild to look back at everything that happened. What would you have done if you were in my shoes, trying to protect your younger siblings like that? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.